Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor back. Today's guest is very unique in the sense of living better, empowering others, and even just sharing some stories relating to diet and exercise, because this is a woman who wears many hats, all of which are quite spectacular. She's an author, an actress, a speaker, a filmmaker, the creator of Epiphany Channel.com, the author of the wonderful book Epiphany, and the curator of some of the most inspirational stories around dramatic, life-altering change taking place in a moment, otherwise known as an epiphany. And Elise Ballard is here to share with us what are epiphanies, how we can potentially have more of them, and how they've had impacts in others' lives, and how they might be able to benefit us. So Elise, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. I appreciate you having me.
Well, Elise, let's just jump right into it here. This is a very unique project. Your book, Epiphany, and your website, Epiphany Channel, is, to the best of my knowledge, the only source of a collection of epiphany stories. So 1, what inspired you to do it? 2, what the heck is an epiphany story? And 3, why should we care?
Those are all very good and loaded. They're loaded. Yes, I call myself, I'm an accidental epiphany expert. I think
Epiphanist?
You're right.
Is that a word? An epiphanist?
I think we need to make it up. I put that in the dictionary. What happened is, basically, the short story is I was an actress and a filmmaker, as you pointed out, and I had an epiphany that drastically changed my life. And when I had the epiphany, I didn't go, oh my gosh, I just had an epiphany. What happened is several weeks later, when my life was drastically different, I looked around and went, how did I get here? And my mind flashed back like a movie to this one instant, this 1 millisecond. And I went, wait, I had an epiphany. That is what they talk about when they talk about someone having an epiphany. So I started asking all these people, do you think you've ever had an epiphany? Just my friends and colleagues. And I was doing documentary work. I come out of doing this sort of what I call guerrilla filmmaking, where it's me and a camera and I'm asking people, interviewing people. And I did a little movie called Lord of the Weens, a documentary about the wiener dog races in Buda, Texas, that kind of had its own cult following. And then I started getting hired to do this kind of work behind the scenes. So I started asking questions to people, what do you think your greatest epiphany in life has been? And that's how the project started. So that's why a lot of the epiphany stories that you mentioned are on epiphanychannel.com, and they are filmed because I'm still filming as many of them as I can. So basically, that is how the whole thing started. And an epiphany, by definition, is a moment of sudden or great revelation. And because I'm asking everyone about their greatest epiphanies in life, the ones that have had the biggest impact on them, I define it as a moment of sudden or great revelation that usually changes your life in some way. But an epiphany, by definition, could be those smaller ones, the aha moment things that people talk about. They don't have to be necessarily some huge life-changing thing. But yes, that is what I have been collecting, the biggest life-changing ones in people's lives. And because I am a storyteller, and they're usually very dramatic and very personal stories, and they're entertaining, interesting, and as you pointed out, extremely inspirational.
At least the thing that I really wanted, obviously I wanted to have you on the show for many reasons, but one of the reasons that really stuck with me is I've noticed in the area of, just like you said, in any area of life, but especially an area of change that so many people struggle with, which is their health. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes we hear stories, and this was my personal experience, where you might watch infomercial, do this, you might pick up a book, you do this because your doctor tells you, but at the end of the day, almost always, it's been my observation that if you ask someone who has successfully reversed their diabetes or overcome a great weight difficulty or overcome a psychological difficulty, they can point to a few moments where there was an emotional and mental shift that they could no longer deny. And that sounds a lot like an epiphany.
Yeah. Well, in my case, when I had the epiphany that set me on this trajectory that, so when I started collecting all these stories, and like I said, I'm like, have become this accidental expert in epiphanies. My thing was, I was an actress and I was playing a role, and doing research for the role, hours and hours of research. I was in an unhappy marriage at the time and had been for years, but I couldn't seem to extricate myself from the relationship, which I was stuck in life, which so many of us find ourselves stuck in certain situations, whatever they may be. And in my case, in this particular case, it was a relationship and it was a marriage. So it was a big deal. But this research I did for this role, so I'd gotten information and education about fertility and about adoption, because I was playing a woman who wanted to have a baby with her husband, and she finds out she's infertile. And then she finds out that her husband has cheated on her and had a one-night stand and gets that woman pregnant. So at the end of the play, she goes to the woman and hands her an adoption brochure, and they end up adopting the baby in the play. So I was charged with researching this, and I said, I will get this adoption brochure. And my epiphany came after days and weeks of playing this role and, in the rehearsals and then doing the research. And then I printed the adoption brochure. And while I was waiting for that brochure to print out and as coming towards me, I had the thought, I could do that. I don't have to stay. And I realized what was really keeping me in that marriage was a deep-seated fear that I was not facing, that I might never have a biological child of my own if I left. And I realized that there was a myriad of ways to become a parent in this day and age, and that was no reason to stay in an unhappy marriage, for me. So that freed me in that instant. I was free. I felt like a weight snapped free from my body, and I was able to start changing my life when I'd been unable to. Now, my point in bringing that up is it was the research and the education. And I always say knowledge and education will help you. Anything you're scared of, regardless, or if you look in your life and you're stuck, you start looking around. What am I scared of? What is it? And you start, finding everything you can, listening to podcasts like yours, getting books, watching shows, whatever you can do to get that information. And like you said, suddenly one day it will all come together. There will be a shift. And when I talk about the 4 things that I found from doing hundreds of interviews, there are 4 things that happen when anyone has a life-changing epiphany. So
Elise, just real quick before we jump, I want to jump into all 4 of those because I think this is so foundational. And we didn't plan this interview, and it's this is why I love to not plan them, because you have just said so many things that have blown my mind. If we did plan this, I don't think it could have worked out any better, because what you just said, what I heard at least, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we want this profound change that can happen in an instant, that doesn't happen by accident. Like, this isn't The Secret, not whatever. I mean, this is something which, when we focus our mind and we continuously put ourselves in an environment, in a situation that can lead both our conscious and subconscious mind, it can feed it with information. We do have this gradual conscious knowledge that builds up, whether it be scientific literature or any other kind of literature. But then one day it seems like there's something that happens on a much more visceral level, which is you almost reach a tipping point, or like you unleash the dam and things just burst through. Is that a reasonable encapsulation of what you just said?
Yeah, well, and it will tie into the 4 things that I'm talking about. What's really interesting about life-changing epiphanies are that you cannot force them. You cannot say, it's a very interesting phenomenon that way. So, but in science, they can create problem-solving epiphanies, right? Or creative epiphanies. They can actually measure people's brains and see what's happening. But on these life-changing epiphanies, they cannot put people in a room and force them to happen. However, there are 4 things that I discovered that happen every single time. So what you can do is cultivate yourself and cultivate your life so that you can cultivate epiphanies, that you can prepare, that you can get ready for them. And I say, and the first thing that always happens when anyone's having a life-changing epiphany is that they're listening, they're paying attention, they're open to these moments for whatever reason. And to your point that you were saying that people constantly are saying that they had been, it took like several things to happen before they finally listened or they paid attention. And when I talk about this listening thing, it's all over the map. I've interviewed people people, they were in prayer or meditation when they had their greatest life epiphany. People that were struggling, facing, a life-threatening illness and something, or they were in absolute crisis, which could mean even the death of a loved one, And, the other thing is people sometimes won't have their life-changing epiphany until they're facing, a crisis that maybe they've brought on themselves, and then finally they'll listen. But for whatever reason, people are open, they're listening, they're paying attention. So you can cultivate that in your life. You can cultivate ways of listening to your inner voice, to yourself, to people around you, paying attention to the world around you. There are ways to do all of that. I'm sure that you have tons of information about that, but we can go over that as well. And then the second thing that always happens when someone has a life-changing epiphany is they're listening, they're open to these moments, and then they have this unshakable belief in the moment and what it means to them. No matter how nuts it might seem to anybody else or even to our own rational minds, they believe what it means to them. Yes? So, and then the third thing that always will happen is that the person always took action on the epiphany. So you can, by definition, again, an epiphany is a moment of sudden or great revelation. So you can have an epiphany. And I talked to a few people that had a moment of sudden or great revelation. They knew it was an epiphany. They got it. They believed it, but they did not take action on it. And therefore it had not changed their life in any way yet. But most everyone I talk to, at least that's in my book, they've taken action on this. And usually that means taking the very first baby step, having no idea what the second step is going to be. But you take that first step. And then what happens is what I call coming into play a lot of times is what I refer to as serendipity. You can refer to it as synchronicity, but it's like circumstances seem to fall into place, and it's as if the world is saying, yes, this is right for you. Yes, keep going. And you take that second step and the third step and the fourth step is revealed. And pretty soon you're on this path that this epiphany had set you on. And you start learning how to listen, to believe in yourself, to believe in how life works, to believe in these moments of revelation. And you learn and you start practicing taking action in life. And then you trust and you look for and you're excited about and grateful for the serendipity that happens in your life, because all of us have this. All of us have a birthright to epiphanies, no matter who you are, no matter how old you are, no matter what you're doing, no matter what your belief system is. I interviewed everybody from atheists to religious leaders and everybody in between. It doesn't matter. We all have epiphanies, and all of this is our birthright. And it's just a matter of being open to it and developing these 4 qualities of life, which, look, everybody's talking about it. I'm sure you've had people on here that are talking about these things and ways to do this in your life. What's happened with me as the accidental epiphany expert is that I was telling these stories. I was bringing these stories forth because I found them interesting, dramatic, entertaining, as well as they were helping me dramatically in my life. They're very inspirational, and they contain some of our greatest wisdom. And in sharing them, you're sharing your wisdom, and we're helping each other be able to use this wisdom in our own lives so we don't have to go through it, And so I just want people to understand that we all have these epiphanies, and they are a tool that we all can use in our lives. And that a lot of times they're overlooked, and we're not realizing that we have these moments that are stories that we can rely on and use as wisdom and inspiration every day of our lives that we're not honoring. So that's what we're talking about here, honoring these moments and then cultivating in our lives. The most successful people I spoke with, if you want to talk about worldly prestige and fame and money and all of that, every single one of those people knew exactly right off the bat what their greatest epiphany in life was. They knew all the details of it. They had been using it ever since they had it as a tool to build their life upon. So they're really valuable things we all have access to.
Elise, this is wonderful. So just to make sure I got it, I want to make sure I got the four components here, and then I want to get your thoughts on something. So the first one is that we're listening, we're paying attention, we're open so that we don't miss it if one of these moments happen. Correct me if I'm wrong at any point in time here. The second is we do have an unshakable belief in that moment, what it means to us, and because we have that unshakable belief, we then take the third step, which is to take action on that step, because again, we believe in it so deeply, and we listen to it in the first place. And the fourth step, is that just we continue to take action or we follow through?
Well, the serendipity that comes into play, obviously that's nothing we force, but what I encourage people to do is notice what happens. Most of the time, like I said, 99% of the time, people take the first step when they have a life-changing epiphany. Like in my case, I'd been in this marriage for, 8 years, and all I did was go and look on Craigslist for a sublet for weeks. Do you know what I mean? And then I finally saw one that I emailed, and then that one happened to be the one that I did. And that led me on a whole new trajectory. That's a novel I just wrote. Do you know what I mean? So,
absolutely.
So the serendipity, and what I want to encourage people to do, and every story has it. Every story that I tell in this book, and that is on the website, and that I will probably talk about in a minute, some of them, serendipitous occurrences happened that we all have, synchronicity, weird things fall into place, and you're like, oh, and then they took a step on that. And then the next thing happened, and the next thing. And what the tool is there, yes, you're right, is to take action when the next thing falls into place for you. And also, I think it really helps to be excited and grateful and to notice it and embrace it and be like, oh my gosh, isn't this so cool? There's a guy in my book named Orion Williams. And like I said, every single person had this happen in their lives. But Orion is a person who had so much of this kind of synchronistic stuff happen that he was so excited about and took major action on it whenever it happened in the exact instant it happened. And I kept hearing it over and over again. But when you get like that, it happens more and your life just gets more exciting.
Oh, absolutely, Elise. Well, and the thing that I found about your 4 steps and what you're sharing here, just so it hits so home with me personally, and I won't get into my personal epiphanies. We'll save that for another show. But just even for our listeners, a lot of the people who I hear who do have these dramatic, we generally focus on physical health, but also talk about mental health quite a bit. And there's this moment where often there's a realization for step 1, this listening, where people, they're listening to podcasts, they're reading books, they're doing some research, and they realize doing what I've always done will result in the same thing I've always gotten. And there's this moment of cognitive dissonance, which they grasp onto and say, I can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? Einstein's definition of sanity. And then they say yes, and they embrace that because they may have had it happen previously, but they never really just like, well, whatever, that infomercial is quite convincing, I'll try that pill. And then they take action, like you said. And listeners, if you are fortunate enough to have an epiphany within a couple of weeks of listening to this podcast, or God willing, this podcast is the one that makes you have an epiphany, then the action I recommend all of us take, because it's easy and it's concrete and it is satisfying as hell, is I want you to physically destroy your scale. I want that to be your first action. I want you to literally take your scale out into your backyard, into your street, back it over with your car and say, I'm no longer going to be judged by the number on that scale. And then continue to notice as you feel and look better, because you will. And Elise, I know you have some wonderful examples of people doing something similar in your book. Would you mind sharing those with us?
Yes, and I love the whole scale thing. Yay, I'm throwing out my scale. I never get on it anyway.
It's also one of those funny visceral things too. It's like tearing up a piece of paper or burning something. It's like you get some aggression out too. Like, teach that scale who's boss.
Yeah. Well, it's physicalizing. It's like a ritual, and we need these as humans,
Absolutely.
But I have the best story. I have the greatest epiphany story that is so like what you were just saying. And it's about a woman who actually is all to do with weight and conquering her diabetes. Her name is Nancy Ballard, and I got her through another referral, and she's not related to me, but she ended up being from Texas, and I'm from Texas. So anyway, that's serendipity. And so Nancy has this amazing story. She'd been obese. She'd struggled with obesity her entire life, and she's filmed on my website. You can go hear her talk about this as well. But basically, she'd been obese her entire life, struggling off and on with her weight. She would lose 100 pounds, but then gain it back, on and on. I think she was at 300 pounds at this time in her life. She's a nurse. So she knew all the physical ramifications. She was on 5 diabetes medications at this time. So she happened to be at home one day. She never watches television. She said it just was on a whim that she she turned on the television. It happened to be Oprah. It happened to be a show of obese women who had lost significant amount of weight. So she goes, I'm going to watch this. So she started watching. And then, as she said, as the show was going on, she goes, oh, yeah, I know. I did that. Yes, yes. Like you were saying, stuff that you've always heard and that you know and that you've done over and over. It never really worked. And then Oprah asked the woman that was on, she'd lost 160 pounds. And she said to the woman, how did you do it? And the woman said, one day I put on my tennis shoes and I tied them and I went on a walk. And Nancy said in that moment, she went, I can do that. And she said before that time, she had never said, I can do that. She said, I should do that. I wish I could do that. I want to do that. She said, I can do that. And she went and got her tennis shoes, put them on, tied them, and walked out the door for 30 minutes and then walked back 30 minutes. And she said when she walked in the door, she knew her life had changed forever. And she started eating differently and she started walking and she lost 140 pounds that year. And she is off all of her medication, has never had to go back, and she's kept the weight off. And, you know, it goes, and there's a lot more that goes into it, but, you know, that's the gist of it.
But Elise, I think that you said a lot more goes into it, and that is certainly true. But I also want to praise and highlight the simplicity there, because there is a key step there, right? Like she'd probably walked before, and she'd probably, like you said, she tried to lose weight before, but before she never had that deep, almost a religious experience about saying this is about something more. This is about something deeper. I often, if we're talking about eating experiences, like most people, if they choose to become a vegetarian or a vegan, which is not personally what my lifestyle is, but these people don't just do it because they want to like lose weight. They do it because maybe they have an epiphany. They watch some visceral thing that gets them all riled up, and they're like, no more. I'm just never going to eat meat again. Like in one moment, there's like, oh, not going to do it anymore. So
yeah. Well, and I will say Nancy has a strong faith in God. So she had prayed. So she felt like too that she had given a certain way that she prayed was different than she'd ever done it before. So I will say that for the listeners who have faith in the divine, that there was that element to it. And before she had that, but it goes into this listening thing. She was open and listening, and what someone else said affected her. And that's why I want to encourage people to really practice their listening, deep listening. We are losing that skill with how we're so bombarded. Do you know what I mean? With technology and just our world is so sped up to really be with who you're talking to. Really listen, be listening to paying attention to the world around you, and getting your mind quiet. And that's when you can really hear things that will affect you and perhaps change your life.
And at least that's, I think, really the key there is that these moments of meaningful change are meaningful. Meaning, if you're watching an infomercial or if you just see an ad in a magazine and you're like, oh, I'll try that. Like if your attitude is, okay, I'll try that. Might as well. Nothing else seems to work. Like that can't work. That's not like this basic human psychology, something that you're not really committed to, something that you don't feel in your bones. That's never going to work out. But by paying attention, by really feeling is also what I hear you saying as well, by really having the ability to feel and embrace that emotion when it comes over you, that can really push you forward for an entire lifetime.
Yeah, it's true. In fact, I'm reading this book called The 7,000 Ways to Listen by a Mark Repo, I think is his last name. And the whole thing is about how to listen on a deeper level. And he said to listen with feeling. It's the difference. And I really, it's the first step in having all of this happen. And, there's another epiphany in my book by a doctor named Dr. Michael Roizen. And he did the books with Dr. Oz called You. I don't know if you know those books.
Absolutely.
Do you know those books?
Yeah,
okay.
Like You on a Diet, You on That.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and I did the videos with those guys. So Dr. Oz is in my book as well. And his whole epiphany is about how to listen. His whole epiphany is about how his whole life changed and his whole perspective and the way he practiced medicine that has led him on this whole trajectory was about the way he listened to people from their world perspective. And Oz says we are all really, We all are our best physician. We all know what's going on with us. Again, you must listen to yourself. You must listen to your body, then communicate that to a doctor. But the best doctors listen to you, and they're teachers. So they, but they really get you to self-heal. You know what I mean? Like you take the medicine and you do the stuff. So it's all about listening from other people's world perspective to get them to understand and for everybody to be incommunicado. And so Roizen is his partner on those U-books. And so I produced the exercise videos that they did for the U-books. So Roizen was one of the first people that I'd interviewed actually behind the scenes before I got this going. And his epiphany was so interesting to me that it kind of helped spark the whole thing to keep going. But he had this whole epiphany about basically it was the basis for all their work with this thing he started called Real Age. And the summary of his epiphany is we can actually control our genes and change our bodies and lives on a cellular level simply through our actions. Mm-hmm. We can literally change our genes through our actions, we're proving now. Do you know what I mean? We can change it and people are, I think he said, before we had this thing, well, we were born with this, no. We can change most things. And I think people aren't aware of that. They don't realize, how powerful it is. But it takes work, It takes you getting in the mindset, taking action in your life, doing inner work, developing these muscles of belief and taking action and, doing the right things in life, taking action to make yourself healthier. But you can absolutely change your genes and change your life. And they never knew that before. This is all cutting edge science.
And Elise, the thing that you said there that I really, there's two components, and I think you capture them really, really well. And I think oftentimes it may be a source of confusion for people because they think it's one or the other. And I think what we're talking about here is it's both. Let me describe what I mean. So you talk about this first, it was very listening. Like it is actually externally focused. You listen to things that are happening in the outside world, but then you bring that into your inner world and you do that inner work. So there's an external stimulus, but then the burden, for lack of better terms, the work, the responsibility is on you to take that and feel it and think about it and meditate on it and concentrate on it and then take action upon it so that if you don't do either one of those, like if you just stay within yourself your entire life, well, that's not going to work out. And if you constantly are looking outside of yourself exclusively for what to do, I mean, this is why we see people, they do this and then they do this and they take this pill and they try this diet and they do this because they're only looking externally. So it sounds like you've got to do both the external and the internal and then integrate them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the one thing that, one of the ways to be a good listener is you have to find ways to quiet your mind, and I think it's so interesting that I'm the one that done this project and that I found this to be true because I am the worst about that. I am the worst about it. So, that's why I've been, on this trajectory chosen or whatever I found myself on this because it's what I needed to learn. And there are different ways for everyone, I believe, to find ways that quiet your mind. But unless you can get quiet in your mind and find ways to do that, you can't hear and honor that inner voice. Like Dr. Oz said, you know what's going on. You got to be quiet and pay attention to be able to communicate that in those instances. But, our inner voice, everyone has one. And, you got to listen to it. It's your inner guidance. And it's not a religious thing. It's, like I said, I've talked to people who are atheist, agnostic, to the most religious, and they all talk about this inner voice that is really what they get in touch with when we have an epiphany too. And, had I listened to my inner voice, one of the lessons I've learned from doing, now I say this project is my greatest epiphany in life for a myriad of reasons, but it is. And I know exactly the moments where it became my greatest epiphany. But one of the things that I do now because of it is that when I have the inner voice or that inner knowing telling me what to do, even if it may not be right on paper, right? Like other people would think it was crazy, or even I think it's crazy, or maybe not crazy, but I just don't have the proof that that's the best way to go, so to speak. But my gut is telling me I listen to it because every time I haven't done it, it's not it's not the right thing. And the most successful people, that is what they're doing. They are guided by their gut, by their inner voice. And the goal here, guys, is to get quiet enough that we can start paying attention and honoring that voice and acting with that as guidance. And as you said, also taking an outer stimulus, because we're living in such an exciting time with all this information out there that we can use now. But if you don't have an inner calm to disseminate it and figure out what fits for you, it just, like you said, you'll find yourself on a treadmill,
Elise, it's two things. And then, I mean, I almost just want to end the podcast right now because that was very beautiful, but there's a couple of things that we've got to cover. And that's
sure.
One is this wonderful quote, I think, which relates to what you just said. And I'm going to paraphrase it here, but I believe it's by Blaise Pascal. And Blaise said that all of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit in a room alone quietly. And I think that speaks to the fact of many hundreds of years ago, or whenever Blaise Pascal was alive, thousands of years, I don't know history, is that problem has always existed. And also, you made a point about this doesn't have to be a religious thing. This isn't a woo-woo thing. And for any listeners, I would say this is called the Smarter Science of Slim. We're all about science. If you would like to prove to yourself that this isn't woo-woo, go do some research in quantum mechanics. And you will see, I'm talking research, like don't read a popular, like research that area, and you will come to start to see just how much science there is backing this supraconscious awareness. It's
I am
quite
so glad you're saying that. There were several epiphanies in the book. They're in the miracles section, but just because a miracle by definition is something that is inexplicable by natural law as we know it, but quantum physics would explain both of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, the two that I'm thinking of. Do you know what I mean? And I thought that was another interesting thing about the Epiphany stories, that I have a lot of scientists in different areas of science in the book, as I talked about the doctors, and but I also have like psychologists and other researchers, but it's very true. It's a lot of this stuff proves it's not impossible with quantum physics, the stuff that they talk about.
I love it. Well, Elise, this is good stuff. And certainly we've only scratched the surface here. And certainly I want to thank you for, I bet you've spurred people to have their own epiphanies just by understanding and seeing your work. So I think that's fabulous. And I think what you're doing is wonderful. And folks, if you want to learn more about Elise, again, her name is Elise Ballard and her website is epiphanychannel.com. And it's constantly evolving and growing. It's a great source for inspiration and also education. And she's also written a wonderful book by my publisher as well, HarperCollins, called Epiphany. So, Elise, this has been just an absolute joy. What's next for you?
Well, I just wrote a novel, actually, and so we'll see what happens with that. And I'm working on the documentary of Epiphany and different things for the website, different web shows and reality shows. So we'll see what happens next for the next moment of Epiphany. But I'm about to do another stage of the website. So there'll be different content coming up, and I'm still interviewing people. Yeah, so if anybody wants to send in their greatest epiphanies in life, you can do that on the website as well. You can share your epiphany with us. I love it. Well, Elise, if you ever want to hear the story of how a Microsoft engineer had an epiphany that changed his life completely into working to solve one of the greatest crises that our culture currently faces, that's the diabetes epidemic, I'd be happy to tell you mine. So I definitely want to hear it. Oh my gosh, we should have done a whole podcast just hearing your epiphany. Well, maybe we'll have to have you back on the show. Yeah, definitely, though. I'd love to hear it when you have time. So thank you so much for having me on. It was really fun. And let me know if you ever have any questions. All right. Thank you so much, Elise. All right. Take care. Thanks so much. Thank you. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's show as much as I did. And certainly this week and every week after. Remember, eat smarter, exercise smarter, and live better. Talk with you soon.